Part 3. In this part, you will hear 3 talks or lectures. The talks or lectures will not be repeated. There are 5 questions for each talk or lecture. For each question, choose the right answer A, B, C, or D. Questions 21 to 25 refer to the following lecture. Listen to a lecture in a geology class. The lecture is on the structure of the Earth. Today, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the structure of the Earth. The Earth is made up of a number of layers, from the outside to the inside. The main layers are the crust, the mantle, and the core. Let's look at a diagram of the Earth's main layers. The crust is the thin outer layer, then there is the mantle. And finally, the core, which is divided into the outer core and the inner core. First, let's talk about the crust. The crust is a thin, hard layer of rock. As you can see in the diagram, the crust is quite thin. The crust is about 20 miles thick under land masses. Under the oceans, the crust is even thinner. The crust is only about 4 miles thick under the oceans. Now, let's talk about the mantle. The mantle makes up the greatest part of the Earth. The mantle is about 1,800 miles deep. It's made of stony materials that were created from silicate minerals. The mantle is a huge mass of stony material. Now, we'll look at the core, which actually has 2 distinct parts, the outer core and the inner core. Neither the outer core nor the inner core is as wide as the mantle. The outer core is less than 1,400 miles wide, and the inner core has a radius of 800 miles. The outer core is a layer of liquid metal. It definitely has liquid nickel and iron, and it may have other substances. The outer core is the only liquid layer. The inner core is composed of nickel and iron, as the outer core is. But the inner core is not a liquid layer like the outer core. It is extremely hot at the inner core. But there's also an extreme amount of pressure on the minerals in the inner core that keeps them firm rather than liquid. This is all for our overview of the various layers that make up the Earth. We'll be having a quiz on the material next class, so be prepared. Questions 26 to 30 refer to the following lecture. Listen to a lecture in a film studies class. In the first 2 decades of the 20th century, cinema established itself as a powerful mass medium. Movies were a popular entertainment. Movies were also regarded as high art by the intellectuals of the day. Many people believed that cinema, or film, would be the defining art form of the new century. Even in its earliest years, film was developing its own style, a style that was distinct from that of the theater. But what do we mean when we speak of film style? To put it simply, style is the texture of a film's images and sounds. It's the filmmaker's systematic use of the techniques of the medium. For example, staging, lighting, performance, camera framing, and focus. Editing and sound also contribute to style. A few filmmakers of the silent era were already developing film style, most notably in the editing technique of cutting. Cutting is when the action is broken up into separate shots or pieces of film, and then the shots are recombined to tell the story in a coherent way. Before cutting, the action in films was like it was in the theater. The action took place far away from us, and it was continuous. It wasn't interrupted by any closer views of the actors. Early film critics didn't like films that looked too much like theater. Theater was a well-recognized art form with its own traditions and methods. However, film was something new, and it was an art form that owed its birth to the technology of the moving picture camera. The critics preferred to see stylistic camera work and editing, the techniques that set film apart from the theater. A lot of critics felt that editing was the most important film technique. Cutting, the change from shot to shot, was regarded as the key to film artistry. Another film technique, called cross-cutting, made it possible to tell two stories at the same time. Cross-cutting, it's also called parallel action, involves showing segments from two different sequences, moving back and forth from one to the other. Cross-cutting was used in the 1903 film The Great Train Robbery. The film shows bandits escaping from the scene of their crime, and then it cross-cuts to a scene where the townspeople are dancing at a party, unaware the robbery has taken place. The audience easily understands that the two scenes are going on at the same time. The person who actually receives the credit for inventing most film techniques is D.W. Griffith. While Griffith didn't invent everything about film, actually, he defined and redefined the innovations of other filmmakers. He created movies that critics and audiences recognized as a unique narrative form. This is because he perfected the elements of film grammar and the art of the story film. Instead of having one camera shoot a scene from one position, D.W. Griffith filmed each scene from many angles, and then he pieced together the sequences in the editing room. He used editing to heighten and control the dramatic impact of the scene. He introduced analytical editing, that is, breaking down a scene into shots that show closer views of people's faces or gestures. These loosely framed shots are known as close-ups. The close-up conveys a character's emotions through subtle changes in the eyes, mouth, and brow. After D.W. Griffith, the close-up became a standard tool in the language of film. Questions 30 to 35 refer to the following lecture. Listen to part of the lecture in history class. The agricultural revolution of 10,000 years ago started the great shift from rural to urban living. As human settlements evolved from simple groups of people to larger villages and then to towns and cities, their basic pattern changed. The early rural villages grew naturally, sort of organically, as there were plants or bushes, and buildings were clustered near water sources and around village gardens with tree for shade and pastures for animals. A lot of us yearn to escape to these simpler, more romantic settlements of the past. But there are probably more of us who have a powerful urge to explore new ideas and to build bigger and better structures. We now have super settlements called cities. Our city planners and architects have converted the organic pattern of the village into a geometrically perfect grid. Our natural habitat has been transformed into an expanse of hard, straight surfaces with stone and metal and concrete and glass. Of course, the city is still a wonderful place for stimulation, for opportunity, and for cultural interaction. In fact, you could say the city is our most spectacular creation, and, believe it or not, it has elements of the rural past. In the average North American city, about 1/3 of the surface is given to streets and buildings. The rest is covered by trees and grass. Foresters call it the urban forest, meaning all the trees in city parks, the trees planted along streets and highways, and the trees in people's yards. The extent of this forest is sort of amazing, 2/3 of our urban space. The concept of a tree-lined village green has a long history, but one of North America's first public parks that was sort of created as a unified project was Central Park in New York City. Central Park was designed by landscape architects Olmsted and Voss in the late 19th century. They took their inspiration from the gardens of European estates and the romantic landscape paintings from that period. Central Park was set in a rectangular site covering over 800 acres in the middle of Manhattan Island. By the 19th century, the original forest was long gone. The area had been used as a common pasture for animals, but eventually it deteriorated into a kind of urban wasteland dotted with garbage dumps. Olmsted and Voss transformed this wasteland into something like its original appearance, with rolling hills, grassy meadow, and woofy thickets with thousands of trees. The result is sort of an oasis in the middle of steel and stone. Central Park has been called the city's lung because of its purifying effect on the air, not to mention its effect on the human psyche. It remains one of the best examples of what we can do with the open spaces of our cities. When you look at how far we've come as humans, when you consider that we've developed something called civilization, you come to realize that the finest evidence of our civilization is this city. The city is a symbol of experimentation and creation, a place where we can come together for work and entertainment, for art and culture, for wonder and opportunity. And, like the rural villages of the past, the city is where we come together to share cultural experiences with other humans. Indeed, to define what it is to be human.